Muscle. Muscle is special because it can contract. It can change length. And there are three main kinds of muscle in your body. They all are important for moving things. They just move different things. So first we'll look at skeletal muscle. I'm going to use a red pen for that. Skeletal muscle. Over here I have a bigger picture of, let's imagine that this is the biceps muscle or something like that, the rectus femoris. So a muscle on your quadricep, let's say, on the front of your thigh. And then right here what I highlighted, it represents one single muscle cell. Can you believe that? They're really long. They can be a couple of feet long depending on how long your thigh is, let's say. So now we're going to look close up at that and see what it would look like under a microscope. The first thing you'll notice, once you get it well focused anyway, is these lines. And those lines we call striations. Really just means stripes, right? You can kind of hear the word stripe in there. Striations. And those are caused by overlapping proteins inside the cells called myosin and actin. And the more or less they overlap, then the longer or the shorter the muscle cell is. So it's because of the overlap that the muscle cell can change length. Another thing that is notable about skeletal muscle is that it has more than one nucleus. And usually they're squashed up against the sides, kind of like this. You can understand why they need a couple of more than one nuclei, because a nucleus of a cell controls protein synthesis, right? It kind of starts it out. And if you have a really long muscle cell and you need to make more actin and myosin down here, it would take a long time to transport it to another part in the cell. So there's like outpost nuclei that can all make more, send the directive to make more actin and myosin. Okay, now let's look at cardiac muscle. We'll use a blue pen for this one. So cardiac muscle, let's see if you can tell what's the same and what's different. Here I go. So this is all one cardiac muscle cell. They're not going to be as long because if you look here on the heart, you're going to have some that take up the length of the atrium and some that take up the length of the ventricle, but none of them would be anywhere near as long as, say, a muscle fiber on your quadriceps or on the front of your thigh. But hopefully you could see that we just made, what are these things called? Striations. Oh, sorry, blue pen. So it still has striations. Now, what else do you notice? Nucleus, right? But only one. So we say it's uninucleated, like a unicycle, just has one wheel. Uni means one. Multi means many. And then there's one other really cool thing that you might have noticed, that it's separated. We call that branched. And here's another one over here, and notice that there's even something else that's special. One end of a cardiac muscle fiber is connected to another cardiac muscle fiber with intercalated discs. Sometimes they're called intercalated discs. Intercalated is the other way they're sometimes described. Intercalated or intercalated. And what this does is allow ions that are going to make the muscle cell contract easily flow from one cell to the other. So what you'll notice is that the purpose of the intercalated disc and the purpose of the branching are actually the same. What they do is they allow swift communication between the cells for a coordinated pump contraction. Coordinated. These are special designs just for the heart to make sure that it pumps in a concerted effort. Whereas a skeletal muscle, you can actually have parts of it that are contracting and other parts that aren't, and you can still move. But the heart, if it is not pumping all at once, then it's not going to be an effective pump at all. Okay, then the last kind, a muscle down here, is smooth muscle. Seems like there's a little bit of smooth muscle in pretty much every organ in the body. There are no striations, and there's just usually one central nucleus. There is actin and myosin, and they even overlap like they do in cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle, but they're just not organized enough that it's real visible when you look at them under a microscope. So when they contract, it is a slower contraction. It's often wave-like through the organ, whatever it is. And let me give you an idea of some of the locations. Skeletal muscle, obviously, in skeletal muscle. You have over 600 of those in your body. Cardiac muscle, obviously, one place, the heart. Smooth muscle, however, seems to crop up everywhere. I'll get you started. So, the GI tract, because you got to move food. The respiratory tract, because you can control airflow in the lungs through bronchioles. So it's around bronchioles. Lines all your blood vessel, surrounds blood vessels. A lot of times you'll find it surrounding a gland, so it can squeeze the product out. The uterus, bladder, sphincter muscles. Those are muscles that help you to hold in your urine or hold in a bowel movement or hold food down into the stomach. This picture over here kind of gives you an idea of some of the layers you might find in the intestines. So if this is one coil of intestine, look at all of this pink would be smooth muscle. And then do you remember the areolar connective tissue? Would be in this area here, part of the submucosa of the intestine. And one of the main jobs of that is to absorb the nutrients and fight infection. Remember all those mast cells that are there? And then going back to the epithelial page of your notes, the inner lining of the GI tract are, do you remember? Simple columnar epithelial tissue. So look at this. We've got three of the major kinds of tissues right here in one coil of intestine. The food's coming through the lumen, and then it's interacting directly, so it's touching the simple columnar cells. And then it passes through them and it's absorbed into the bloodstream in this area called the areolar connective tissue. So that's connective tissue. If there is any bacteria in the food, then hopefully the mast cells will fight that off. And then the smooth muscle, and other white blood cells too, would help fight infection. Then the smooth muscle is the next layer, and it can squeeze the food through faster or slower, and it can even make it go back and forth and mix it up. Then you're thinking, well, there's only one other kind, the nervous. And sure enough, you have nervous input that can come to the smooth muscle. That can control how quickly the food moves through or not. Then the last thing I want to do on this page is just think about why do you need the smooth muscle in all of these locations. So the GI tract, the smooth muscle will push food through. I'll kind of mention that right now. So pushing food. The respiratory tract has smooth muscle around the bronchioles, so it controls airflow into the lungs. If someone has an asthma attack, then their bronchioles are getting too narrow. And in the lining the blood vessels, it is the smooth muscle that can either cause the blood to move more easily to an organ, or lower the blood flow to an organ. Surrounding a gland, it can control secretion by either constricting, so like think your bile duct. You're going to squeeze bile into your small intestine to help digest your food, your fat particularly, but it's not going to be coming out all of the time, so in between meals, it's constricted and not allowing the bile to leave. And then the uterus, it's going to help expand. Smooth muscle can be stretchy, so it can expand with the baby, and then when that baby's all cooked, it will push the baby out. And then the bladder, also the smooth muscle there is helpful for expansion and pushing out urine. And then the sphincter muscles are particularly important in controlling exit from the body, or sometimes from a particular organ. For example, there's something called the ileocecal valve. That's at the end of the small intestine, and it doesn't allow chyme or digested food to leave the small intestine and enter the large intestine until all of the nutrients have been absorbed in the small intestine. So sphincters can control exits from a particular organ, and the example there is the ileocecal valve.